Hey guys, in today's video I would like to talk about basic scales and intervals. So as we talked about before, scales come from the musical alphabet. So the most common scale that we start with is the C major scale. Okay? So a C major scale consists of the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. If you start over, it starts over at C again and goes to the next octave. So what we're thinking about here is this is a C major scale, okay? So basically, if this is 1, the next note is going to be 2. So we actually call that a second. Now, intervals are the distance between two notes. So if you're on a piano, the next key is the next note, and we call that a second, okay? Now, most of the seconds in a major scale are what we call major seconds. However, there are two places where we have a minor second, which is a smaller interval. Okay, and I'll explain that all in a second, but just so you know to start with, if we take C major and we go from C to D, that's what we call a whole step. So we can write a W. Okay? Now, a whole step is also a major second, like I mentioned. So, whole step equals major second, half step equals minor second. And we'll get to that in a second, but I just want you to know. So from C to D is a whole step. From D to E is a whole step. Okay? From E to F is actually a half step. So it's only a minor second here. Okay? From F to G is a whole step. G to A, whole step. A to B, whole step. Now if we go to the next octave here, we have from B to C is actually a half step. So the formula for a major scale we can say is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? So whole step, half step, and then 3 more whole steps and then a half step. Again, we could also call that major second, minor second, major second, major second, major second, minor second. Okay? So every scale that falls into a major or minor key has 2 half steps in it. Now, it always falls between E and F. So you're always going to have a half step between E and F. Same thing goes for B and C. No matter what key you're in, what instrument you're playing, B to C is a half step. Also, if you take a look at the piano here, this is the note C. C, D, E. Now we get to E and there's no black key or a sharp or flat in between these two white keys. You see that? Every other note has a black key in between it, so it's a sharp or a flat in between each note. So between E and F there is no sharp or flat. Okay, so this is a half step. Okay? Then we have F, G, A, B. And then between B and C, the same thing again. There's no black key up here, so there's no B sharp. It goes right to C. Now when it comes to understanding intervals, I think a really easy way to think of them is on a guitar string. So if you just think of the distance on a guitar string, how high up you go to play the fret, that's a bigger interval. So for example, if I draw one string here, this resembles a guitar string. Okay? So if I say 0, if I start from 0, that would be open, right? So if I play the open note, that's a 0. Now if I go from 0 to 1, that would be playing 0 to 1 on the guitar, the open to the first fret. An example of that on the guitar would be to play 0 on the first string, then play the first fret, then that resembles 1. So 0 to 1. So for each of these intervals, what we're going to do is conceive 0 to 1, the next one's going to be 0 to 2, and then it's going to be 0 to 3, and so on, so we can see the distance further away from the original note, which is the 0, okay? So if I play 0 to 11, that is a bigger interval. See how much further away it is from the original note? That's a bigger interval than if I play it from 0 to 1, okay? Or a little bit bigger would be 0 to 3, and it keeps getting bigger as you go further away from the original note. So we can actually draw all 12 frets using this system here. Okay, and you can see here that I have created a number system 0 to 1, 0 to 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to number 12. So you can see every single interval on the guitar until we get to the octave, which is going to be 12. This one here, 0 to 1, is what we call a minor second. That's what we call a minor second, little m2, all right? Also known as a half step. Think of it that way. It's a half step. All right? The next interval is called a major second or a whole step. This interval is a minor third. This interval is a major third. Okay? Now before we go on, you might be thinking, well, how does this correlate to the notes? Okay? Well, the notes, you can think of it as, if you're on this one, our notes are going to be E. E is the open. Then we're going to play a 1, which is F. And just like we learned on the piano, between the notes E and F, there are no sharps or flats. So it's just a half step right here. So a minor second is the notes E and F. Now, the next note is going to be a whole step. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from E to F sharp. It means it's one note above F. So F sharp gives us a whole step after E. Now with the minor third, you can think of it as, if I draw the arrow over here, this would be E to G. Now that's important because G is the third. Right? So if you have a scale that's in E, we're going to start with E, and then the third note of the scale would be G. That's why it's called a third. Major third here, we have E to G sharp. And here we have a perfect fourth. Okay? Here we have an augmented fourth. We'll talk about that in a second, or diminished fifth. Here we have a perfect fifth. Here we have a minor sixth, major sixth, minor 7, major 7, and octave 8. P8 means perfect octave. Okay? So you'll notice the only perfect intervals we have in the scale is the perfect octave, perfect fourth, and the perfect fifth. Every other interval has a major or a minor version of it. Major 6, minor 6, both of those. So if we continue with the notes here, for a perfect fourth from E, we're going to go to A. A is the fourth from E. Okay? Now this one, we're going to think E to A sharp. That would be an augmented fourth. Okay? Augment means a little bigger, so we're going to go a little bit bigger than a perfect fourth. We're going up to A sharp now, because we're going to have 0 to 6, which is a bigger interval than 0 to 5. So E to A. So you can also think of this as E to B flat, if it's a diminished fifth. So this interval is kind of unique, where it can go from either direction. It can be from a fifth diminished or an augmented fourth, meaning a smaller fifth or a bigger fourth. Okay? Now it's only by a half step, because every single one of these intervals is a half step, because we're only going 1 fret on the guitar. So 1 fret on the guitar going up is always a half step, or a minor second. Okay, perfect fifth. E to B, minor sixth. So we'd have a C. E to C is our minor sixth, okay? Because there's no B sharp. So it goes right to C. So then our major sixth is E to C sharp. Our minor 7 is E to D. And our major 7 is E to D sharp. And then our octave is E to E. It's the same note. Okay? Oh, another thing I should mention is you can also have a unison. If you just think of 0 and 0, that's called a unison. That means it's the same note, unison. So this is basically the way that intervals work on the guitar. So again, going back to the fretboard on the guitar, if we think of 0 to 1, that's like this, on the same string. We're just picking any string, but we're going to start with E because we wrote all the notes for the E string here. So E, 0 to 1 is a half step. E to F, okay? So you can play any of these. So say I did 0 to 7, that's a perfect fifth, okay? So that would be 0 to 7 right here, okay? Or 0 to 5 would be which one? Perfect fourth, right? 0 because it's to the 5th fret, 0 to 5, 0, 5, okay? If I go 0, 3, 0, 3, that's a minor third, E to G, E to G. So that's basically how intervals work. Now we do think of intervals past the octave when we get more advanced, so you start thinking of ninths and 11ths and 13ths and higher extensions in the intervals, but for right now, we're just going to stick with the whole first octave, and we just want to understand these common terms and understand that we have minor and major intervals, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor and major sixth, minor and major seven, and also a perfect octave. And one last thing I'd like to add about the intervals is the augmented fourth and diminished fifth has another name for it that's called the tritone. So this interval is very important because it is the exact middle point in the scale. So if we have 0 to 12 and we cut that in half, it's 0 to 6. 0, 12, 0, 6. So that's the exact halfway point in the scale, okay? So an important part about that is when you get to play more advanced chords later on and you have to play a chord that has a flat 5, then you know what that means. That's a diminished fifth, okay? Flat is the same as diminished. If you think of a diminished note, like a diminished fifth means a flat fifth. Same with augmented means sharp. So if I have an augmented fourth, that means a sharp 4. Okay, so that sums up our video on basic scales and intervals. And in the next video about scales, I will talk about the circle of fifths and different keys, so we can learn scales in different keys and understand which notes to sharp or flat that are within those keys. But right now we just want to understand the basic terminology of the standard intervals within one octave.